I was just standing there, in the middle of the grocery store aisle, when it happened. A young man suddenly screamed at an older man, right out of nowhere. His voice cracked through the quiet hum of shoppers like a thunderclap. The older man didn't say a word at first. He just looked down, almost frozen. I felt a chill run down my spine. People around us stopped what they were doing. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others stared, shocked and unsure. I couldn't believe someone would shout like that in public, at an elderly man no less. The tension was so thick, you could almost cut it with a knife. And then, something happened. Something no one expected. But what happened next? I will never forget it. That day, I was just running errands like usual. It was one of those errands that feels small but somehow drags on. I needed a few things: milk, bread, some fruit. Nothing special. The grocery store was busier than I expected. Maybe it was because of the weekend or some sale, but the aisles were packed with people pushing carts, grabbing items, and talking loudly. It wasn't the calm, quiet place I usually like. As I moved through the store, my eyes caught an older man in the next aisle. He wasn't loud or flashy, just gentle and slow. His steps were careful, almost hesitant. I noticed how he looked at the shelves with soft eyes, reaching slowly for what he needed. There was something about him, a quiet kindness maybe. Then from the other end of the aisle, a young man came rushing in. He looked annoyed, like he had somewhere better to be. He shoved past a couple of shoppers without saying excuse me. His face was tight with frustration. It seemed like every second was too long for him. He kept checking his phone and tapping his foot like he was running out of time. The way he moved made the air feel tense, and I could tell the older man noticed him too. But instead of moving faster, the older man just kept taking his time, steady but slow. I had no idea what was about to happen next, how quickly the irritation would turn into something no one expected. The young man's impatience grew with every second. He kept glancing at his phone, then at the older man, who was still moving slowly, carefully picking up a few cans from the shelf. Suddenly, the young man stopped, his face tight with frustration, and without warning he shouted, "Hey, could you move faster? Some of us have places to be." The older man looked startled. He blinked, then lowered his gaze. His voice was soft, almost barely audible as he replied, "I'm sorry, I'm just trying to—" But before he could finish, the young man cut him off, his voice louder and sharper now. "Trying to what? Take your sweet time? You're so slow, it's useless." A hush fell over the aisle. People paused their shopping, turning their heads toward the scene. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious. No one moved forward to stop it. The older man shifted his weight, trying to step aside to let the young man pass. He nodded apologetically, saying again, "I'm sorry," but the young man wasn't done. He sneered, louder this time. "Yeah, sorry won't fix how slow you are. You should just stay out of the way." His words hung heavy in the air, cutting deeper than anyone expected. The older man's shoulders sagged, but he still didn't raise his voice or argue back. Instead, he looked down, trying to hold himself together. Around us, the silence was thick. Some shoppers exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay quiet. The young man's anger seemed to fill the entire aisle, but no one stepped up. I felt a knot in my stomach. Something about the way the older man just stood there quiet and hurt, made my heart ache. Then, just as I thought the moment couldn't get any more tense, something happened, something that changed everything. As the young man's harsh words echoed, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: tears. Quiet, slow tears welled up in the older man's eyes. They didn't fall right away, but I could see the pain there, clear as day. His lips trembled slightly, like he was holding back something he didn't want to show. Then, in a voice so gentle it barely carried across the aisle, he said, "I'm doing the best I can." His eyes met the young man's for a brief moment. "I've been hurt," he added softly, "from the war." The words hung in the air like a fragile glass ornament, suddenly fragile and precious. The entire aisle seemed to freeze. The buzz of conversation stopped. Shoppers' eyes widened. Some whispered quietly to each other. You could feel the shift, a heavy wave of silence washing over everyone. The young man's anger vanished in an instant. He froze, the fire in his eyes dimming as he stared at the older man's trembling form. But even then, he didn't say a word. No apology, No softening of his tone, just silence. I couldn't look away. It felt like time itself slowed down. The older man's story, whispered and simple, suddenly made the young man's harsh words seem cruel and thoughtless. I wanted to step forward and say something to break the silence, but the moment was bigger than me. Everyone was waiting. And in that silence, I realized this was only the beginning. Something deeper was stirring between these two men, something that no one in that aisle was ready for yet. The silence didn't last long. Just when I thought the moment might stretch on forever, a woman's voice broke through, sharp, clear, and filled with fierce anger. "Hey," she said, stepping forward from a few feet away. "That's enough." Everyone turned to look at her. She was in her late 30s or early 40s, with tired eyes but a strong presence. Her voice didn't waver as she faced the young man, her gaze steady. "You have no right to speak to him like that," she said firmly. "Do you even know who you're yelling at?" The young man looked startled, then defensive. The woman continued without waiting for a reply. "My brother served too. He fought in the war, but he never came home. Not like him, not alive." Her voice cracked for a moment, and I could see the weight behind her words. She wasn't just defending a stranger, she was speaking from deep pain. "You think it's okay to yell at a man who's already carrying so much?" she asked. "You think his injuries are an excuse for being slow? Maybe you don't understand the battles some people fight every day." The young man's face tightened. I could see the anger and confusion swirling inside him. For a moment it looked like he might back down. But then, surprisingly, he pushed back harder. "I'm angry," he shouted. "Angry at all of it. At people like him who survived, while others didn't. It's not his fault, but I can't help it." The aisle grew quiet again, but this time there was a different energy. People around started shifting closer to the older man. A few nodded at the woman's words, their eyes filled with respect and understanding. More shoppers quietly closed ranks behind the veteran, creating a small barrier of support. The young man looked around, suddenly aware he was surrounded, not by enemies, but by people who understood what this man had been through. Still, he held his ground, his fists clenched. But the anger now seemed tangled with something else, hurt, confusion, and maybe even regret. I felt my heart pounding. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a moment where pain, anger, and history all collided, right there between the shelves of canned beans and cereal boxes. And then the older man, the veteran himself, did something none of us expected. The older man took a deep breath. For a moment his eyes closed, like he was gathering strength from somewhere deep inside. Then his voice came out, soft, trembling, but steady. "I served overseas," he began quietly, "far from home, in places most people don't want to think about." He looked around at the small crowd that had gathered, at the woman who had spoken up, and even at the young man who still wore his anger like a shield. "I lost friends there," he said, voice catching. "Men I trusted with my life. Men I promised I'd watch over. Some didn't come back. Some I still see in my dreams." He paused, swallowing hard. "I carry injuries," he continued, "ones you can't always see. The war left scars on my body, and my mind." His hands shook just a little, as he reached for a nearby shopping cart to steady himself. "I never expected anyone to thank me," he said honestly. "That's not why I did what I did, but I never thought I'd be treated like I was worthless." His words hung heavy in the air. The young man's eyes widened, and even some of the people nearby shifted uncomfortably, as if suddenly realizing how little they truly understood. The woman who had defended him nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I could feel my own throat tighten. Here was a man, standing before us with his truth, exposing wounds that went far beyond anything we could see on the surface. He wasn't just an old man in a grocery store aisle, he was a soldier, a survivor, a human being who had given more than most could imagine. And yet, despite it all, he had been shouted at, called useless. The young man looked down, his anger slowly draining away, replaced by something softer, maybe shame, maybe sorrow. The tension in the aisle shifted again. What had started as a confrontation was now a moment of understanding, pain shared, even if imperfectly. For a few quiet seconds, no one said a word. The veteran's story had settled over us like a fragile truth that demanded respect. And in that silence, I realized this story wasn't just about anger or frustration anymore. It was about something much deeper, something we all carry inside, whether we know it or not. Just when I thought the moment had reached its peak, something unexpected happened. The young man, who had stood rigid and angry, suddenly dropped his gaze to the floor. His shoulders shook as if the weight of everything crashing around him was too much to bear. Then, without warning, he broke down crying. Big, uncontrollable sobs that echoed softly through the aisle. It was raw, real, and completely caught everyone off guard. Through his tears, he looked up at the veteran and said, "My dad, he was a veteran too." His voice cracked. "He never came home." There was a long pause. The words settled like a heavy fog. "I'm so angry," he admitted, wiping his face roughly with his sleeve. "Not at you, not really. I'm angry at the world, at how it took him away, and left me to deal with this alone." His eyes searched the veteran's face, desperate for something understanding, forgiveness, maybe even just a little kindness. The veteran's expression softened. He took a small step forward, and reached out a trembling hand. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "I lost people too." The crowd around us grew still, the shared grief binding us like an invisible thread. The harsh anger that had filled the aisle just minutes ago faded away, replaced by something far more powerful: compassion. I could see others wiping their eyes, some holding their breath, as if afraid to break the fragile moment. For the first time that day, the young man lowered his fists, his whole body relaxing just a little. It wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a meeting of wounds, wounds passed down, shared and understood, even if imperfectly. And in that quiet space, something shifted. The aisle, once filled with tension and harsh words, now felt like a place of healing. It was as if the pain that divided them had finally found a way to bring them together. I felt tears welling up in my own eyes, not just from sadness, but from hope. Because sometimes, the most unexpected moments remind us of our shared humanity, how grief can unite us, even strangers in a crowded grocery store. After that moment, the veteran slowly stepped forward. Without hesitation, he opened his arms and wrapped the young man in a gentle hug. The young man didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in, resting his head on the older man's shoulder, as if he had been carrying a heavy weight, and finally found a place to put it down. Around us, the energy in the aisle softened. A few people wiped tears from their eyes. Some quietly clapped, like they were witnessing something rare and beautiful. I felt my own tears fall. There was a quiet power in that hug. A bridge being built between two people who had started out as strangers, and ended as something much more. Something had shifted in that grocery store aisle. The tension, the anger, the pain, it all melted away, replaced by understanding and connection. People who had been standing silently, just moments before now, whispered words of encouragement and kindness. I looked around, and saw strangers exchanging glances, nodding in agreement, feeling something bigger than themselves. That moment showed me how pain can divide us, but also how it can bring us together. After all the tension, the shouting and the silent stares, the young man finally stepped back. It was like a heavy weight had lifted from his shoulders, or maybe he was finally letting it fall. He looked directly into the veteran's eyes, his own filled with a mix of emotions I couldn't fully name: regret, sorrow, and something softer, like understanding beginning to bloom. His voice came out low and gentle, barely above a whisper but clear and sincere. "I'm sorry." Those two words hung in the air, small but powerful. They weren't just a quick apology to end an argument. They felt like a bridge being built, fragile but real. The veteran, who had been standing quietly for all this time, returned the young man's gaze with a warm, gentle smile. His eyes crinkled at the corners, and he placed a steady hand on the young man's shoulder, not in judgment, but in kindness. "It's okay," he said softly. "We're all just trying to find our way." Those words struck me deeply. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about two strangers clashing in a grocery store aisle. It was something much bigger, a moment of healing, of two souls meeting on common ground, despite their pain and anger. The aisle around us, which had felt so heavy and filled with tension just minutes before, now seemed to breathe differently. It was as if the walls themselves softened, and the harshness of the world melted away for a while. What was once a place of conflict had become a small sanctuary, a space where strangers caught in a moment of shared pain and compassion had connected. I looked around at the others who had gathered quietly nearby. Some had tears in their eyes. Others were nodding gently, as if they too understood the weight of what had just happened. I felt a deep, quiet gratitude to be there, to witness something so fragile and beautiful unfolding right in front of me. As I slowly walked away from that aisle, my mind kept replaying the moment, the apology, the hug, the soft smiles. It made me think about how little we really know about the people around us. Every single person carries something inside. Some carry memories so painful, they barely speak of them. Others hold fears and wounds that show only in the smallest ways, through a hesitation in their step, a tired look in their eyes, or a quiet silence. And sometimes, those pains come out in ways that are hard to understand. Sometimes, it's anger or frustration that spills over. Sometimes, it's coldness or distance. But what I learned that day, standing there in aisle 7, was that kindness has a power all its own. Kindness can break through even the hardest walls. It can soften the moments that feel impossible. It can disarm the deepest pain, and it doesn't take much. Not a grand gesture or a perfect speech. Sometimes, it's just a word spoken with real feeling. A small touch that says, "I see you." A little patience when it feels like the world is rushing by. Those small acts, simple and quiet, can change the whole story. That day I saw healing. Not the kind you read about in movies, with dramatic music or tearful speeches. No, this was something real and gentle. It was found in an apology whispered between two men who barely knew each other. It was in a hug that said more than words ever could. It was in shared tears that reminded us, we are not alone. That moment reminded me that no matter how broken, lost or angry someone may seem, there is always a chance for connection. And sometimes, it's that connection, simple and human, that saves us all. I carried that feeling with me long after I left the store. It stayed with me on the drive home, in the quiet moments before sleep, and even in the busy rush of everyday life. Because sometimes, the smallest moments hold the greatest power. And sometimes, healing looks like an apology, a hug, and a silent understanding between two people who needed it most. If this story moved you even a little, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories that touch the heart, and please let us know in the comments, what would you have done if you were there? Your voice matters, and we'd love to hear from you.